The greatest thing I've struggled with really is that there's been an element of that people of downplaying it, that it's only melanoma. There's been an impression that, that all melanomas are equal. My name's Mart. I was diagnosed with melanoma stage 2A in the Philippines in February 2023. And I'm currently living in the UK, and I've been diagnosed with subsequent melanomas, stage 1B and 1A, and also a melanoma in situ. I'm a very adventurous person who's always lived life to the full, looking for adventure overseas, exploring exciting destinations, especially on my surfboard. The first time I really thought something wasn't right was actually around a year before being diagnosed, and it was actually I had a very severe problem on my lips, almost like a lesion, and I was thinking about going to see a dermatologist about it. It stayed on my lips for a very long time, like a non-healing area, and I was very concerned about it. But eventually, it did heal up after maybe 3 months. And I chose not to actually go to see a dermatologist about it. But it was almost as if my body was starting to say to me that all of the years that I've spent under the sun were starting to show signs that something was going wrong, really. So I just wondered actually about whether this was the beginning of some problems related to too much sun exposure. In May 2022, I noticed here on my arm, just in this area here in the upper arm, there was a black dot. Literally a black dot came to the surface, and it was very close to a red dot that I have there, that I've since found out what the red dot is. And the black dot, it just didn't look normal to me. So this was May 2022, and apart from it just looking like a black dot, I did go online, had a little look at some skin cancer lesions, looked at some notes for melanoma and other non-melanoma skin cancers, and basically I didn't find any images that matched or descriptions that matched this black dot. So at this stage, even though it didn't look right, I didn't do anything for 3 months. And during those 3 months, the black dot became larger, maybe had grown to something like 2 millimeters. I suffered 2 huge storms in my life before the third storm of melanoma. I'd worked for several years in Saudi Arabia. We'd use that time to save a large amount of money to build what was going to be our dream home on the island of Sharjah. So after spending all of that time working in Saudi, after sacrificing there in the desert, I completed my dream and finished this dream home overlooking the sea. And everything seemed to be going really well. I really felt blessed by God, in every single way. And then suddenly, just 11 weeks after the house was completed, a super typhoon came in and damaged that house. And that was the first storm. But shortly after the typhoon and the recovery, a corporation moved a lot of heavy machinery in front of our home and began building what they are still building today, which is a 5-star resort. And they were building through the night. We couldn't sleep. We were getting lots of pollution coming into our house. And this is what I called the second storm. Like the first storm, it destroyed our home, my dream home. And the second storm, it destroyed my sense of peace. And I simply couldn't sleep. And so I just wonder whether trauma does have an impact on cancer diagnosis in general. I've just heard so many stories of people having some sort of trauma in their life, and then the cancer emerging. So that's just a big part of my story, really, that preceding that diagnosis were two significant storms. And then the third came along, the worst one, being melanoma. So I went to see a local doctor. She looked at the lesion. I told her about my family history. My father has a history of both BCC and melanoma, skin cancers. And she said that to her it wasn't concerning. She instead focused on taking blood pressure readings, sending me for general blood tests. And I always remember speaking to her, because she said that my blood pressure would be more likely to kill me than anything that she could see on my arm. So that was the first time I saw a doctor. 2 months later, the lesion had grown a little bit to around 5 millimeters. It still didn't resemble anything that I could see online. But I was at this point more concerned. So I sent two pictures of the lesion to a doctor who I could consult with in Saudi Arabia. And he also looked at the pictures and said that he didn't think it was anything. He asked me a whole series of questions about them, about other symptoms. And he said he certainly didn't think it was melanoma. He thought it was something maybe vascular, nothing to worry about. I went to see a doctor again. And by this time, the lesion was probably 7 to 8 millimeters. So it was growing significantly, and it had started to bleed. There was some ulceration on the surface. And he immediately said that it was abnormal. He immediately sent me for a biopsy. And that's what led to me being diagnosed. I think my blood pressure has probably been historically high as a result of my occupation as a teacher, and again we'd gone through significant trauma, so I wasn't particularly surprised that my blood pressure was high. I didn't have any other symptoms at all. At that time, I was probably in a state of denial. I just had a feeling that something wasn't right in terms of the look of the lesion, but in terms of how I was feeling, I didn't want to interrupt my life. I did have this lurking suspicion that it was melanoma. And I probably always felt a little bit worried about melanoma, given my father's diagnosis and given the fact that I have had a lot of sun exposure. So I did have a feeling about it, but in terms of my physical fitness, I was surfing every day. I was living basically my dream life. And I didn't want to interrupt my dream life with a massive load of surgery. And so if a doctor, or indeed 2 doctors, said that it looked good to them, then they were telling me what I wanted to hear. And but there was absolutely nothing else apart from what was on my arm. The actual result took 42 days. And those 42 days, because by this time I'd really worked myself up to, I'd got myself in quite a state. And I think that the time that I really got myself into more of a state is just before the biopsy. I downloaded a skin app, and I'd basically put the lesion in a skin app, and it said something like 90% chance of melanoma. Not on every scan. Sometimes it came up with a BCC. Sometimes it came up with melanoma, but by this time I was very, very, very concerned. And even though Nina said that she wasn't convinced it was anything, with every day that went past, I became more concerned that it would be melanoma. And then on day 42, which was the first week or the second week of February 2023, which is when I was diagnosed with melanoma. I remember the pathology report with melanoma. The depth of the lesion is very important. It was 1.2 millimeters depth, and the ulceration ended up being also very important, and it was ulcerated. So that was the moment that really my world fell apart. 3 months later, a lesion sprung up on my back, and it was a mole. It had changed very rapidly. It was different colors, and I had that excised. I had it biopsied. So I was really, again, at this point in time, I was living in the Philippines. What happened then is I returned to the UK, and I registered at the NHS, which is our National Health Service. The National Health Service these days is under an extraordinary amount of pressure with the amount of patients coming in, and they couldn't see me in terms of the expert team, the dermatologist team at the hospital. They couldn't see me for several months. So really, I was left on my own at this point. And unfortunately, in October of 2023, a dot appeared on my chin, and it didn't look right. And I went to see a private dermatologist because the NHS couldn't see me, and she said that it looked benign to her, but because of my history, she agreed to biopsy it. You know, within a matter of weeks, I also noticed on my cheek here a dark brown patch. So basically, at the same time, there were 2 lesions on my face, one of which was biopsied by a private dermatologist. And then I finally got seen by the NHS. I showed them the picture of the lesion that was biopsied. They said, "Oh, that looks benign." I was waiting a long time. Here in the UK, you wait around 6 weeks for a biopsy. This one was confirmed as a melanoma. And then, because this was confirmed as a melanoma, the NHS team agreed to biopsy the one on my cheek. And they also found another melanoma on my back, or what was later found to be a melanoma. So really, within a very short amount of time, there was a moment in time that I had 3 melanomas going on, and then later I had more wide excision surgery here on my cheek, and so on. So that is the story of my melanoma diagnoses. I think the first surgery that was done in the Philippines on my upper arm, I think perhaps it wasn't quite as bad as I was expecting. It wasn't in an area that I cared about in terms of it wasn't on my face. It was going to be covered up. It was quite painful. It became mildly infected. But really, I bounced back quite quickly from that one. But the surgery that was the most traumatic was the wide excision on my chin, and at the same time, the biopsy on my cheek and the biopsy on my back. I just remember laying in quite a modern facility that I'd been hooked up to a blood pressure monitor, and had all of these people basically cutting skin out of me at the same time. I just remember the anesthetic feeling very painful here on the chin and on the cheek. And I just looked up, and I just felt very scared, actually, really, really scared at this time, because it was just multiple surgeries going on at the same time. And then any subsequent wide excision, the wide excision then on my cheek wasn't as traumatic. And of course, I've started getting more used to my skin being cut up. But it was that moment of really the 3 surgeries at the same time that was the most traumatic for me. Spent so much time researching what would be the best lifestyle and diet approach for melanoma, and actually the data, of course, is mixed. People will always tell you that you should just follow what the doctors tell you to do. And of course, here in the UK, I've asked doctors, what would be the best thing for me to do around lifestyle and diet changes. And the only thing that they ever mentioned was just vitamin D, because studies tell you that vitamin D helps with melanoma, but they didn't say the amount and so on. So Here in the UK, one of the biggest reasons why I'm here in the UK is that I decided to just launch into a very different diet program. One of the programs that caught my eye on the internet involved juicing, carrots, apples, green juices, doing this on the hour, every hour, combining it with coffee enemas, changing my life in such a huge way that it wouldn't have been possible to pursue this in the Philippines. So that's really the greatest thing that has changed for me, is that I eat plant-based, I eat organic, I juice an extraordinarily large amount of carrots each day. I laugh about it because in some of my dermatology checks, my skin has changed color a little bit, and they think that I've been out in the sun, and instead I've just got this sort of slight orange tinge. I still surf, but again, I'm just far more conscious of the sun exposure. But I've just taken a radical approach, really, to trying to heal from the inside, and understanding that the skin checks will continue, and I may face further melanomas, but the best thing for me is to try and boost my natural immunity to help with the situation. I think the biggest challenge has been that I've had to leave my dream lifestyle behind. We'd worked for a number of years. I'd worked in Saudi Arabia. I'd built up a dream life in the Philippines. I was surfing every day. I was hanging out with my son, hanging out with my wife, and I'd worked very hard for this sort of what was going to be like a 5 or 10 year period of retirement, really, in the Philippines before going back to work. So this was an amazing lifestyle, and it was interrupted by that first melanoma. So really, it's just changed everything so much, and I don't really know what my future looks like anymore, because with other lesions now coming up, I no longer feel free to pursue the life that I used to pursue. My life has always been, and it's really, I always just wanted to live a life overseas. So the greatest challenge is just that huge amount of uncertainty, these clouds that are lurking over my head, and just being quite frightened about further lesions, or even also just being so aware that something could happen internally. The greatest thing I've struggled with, really, is that there's been an element of that people of downplaying it, that it's only melanoma. Certainly, there's been an impression that all melanomas are equal. I think for me, if you're struggling with a diagnosis of melanoma, or in fact you've got any diagnosis hanging over you, I think that you have to look forward and believe that the very worst isn't going to happen. And I think that for me, I have struggled a great deal with thinking about catastrophizing things, really. And so often, I think when we catastrophize things, it turns out that we're wrong. So for me, from the very beginning, I thought that the initial melanoma was going to be the end of my life, and basically just under 2.5 years later, and I am still here post a number of surgeries. So I think for me, it's just a matter that at this point in time, that I am still alive and well. I'm still doing some of the things that I love. And while my life has been compromised somewhat, I feel very grateful to be alive today. The biggest piece of advice I would give is to make sure that if something appears on your skin that doesn't look right, don't rely on images on Google. Don't rely on even a dermatologist telling you that it looks benign. If you're unhappy with something, I would push for a biopsy. that's the biggest thing that I would suggest today, because as I mentioned, the 3 invasive melanomas that have appeared on me, all 3 were, I've been told by various experts, that they were benign, that they were nothing, and so on. And it's only really through me pushing that it led to biopsy and eventual diagnosis. So that's really the biggest thing, is because all of the data out there indicates that the earlier you get to surgery with melanoma, the better the outcomes, and that is what I believe.